Publisher Podcast, episode 88. Welcome to the Publisher Podcast, a place where you can come to get inspiration, motivation, help, encouragement, and support in your journey to write, publish, and sell your book. Hosted by Alexa Bigwharf.
'Cause I've been where you've been, and I felt what you're feeling, and I don't want to get in your way.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Publisher Podcast. Today, I am bringing you Jen Craven, who is the author of Upmarket Women's Fiction, Where One Decision Changes Everything. The author of 2 historical fiction novels, Best Years of Your Life is her debut contemporary work. She writes from Northwestern Pennsylvania, where she lives with her family. Welcome, Jen. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to chat with you today.
So you write historical fiction. Let's talk about that first. You've got 2 books out.
So I started in historical with my first 2, but now I'm definitely kind of making the shift over to contemporary. My latest one is contemporary, and I really think that this is kind of the genre where I'm going to stick around. I have 2 more works in progress that I'm, plotting and drafting, and they're definitely contemporary stories as well.
So when you say contemporary, you're basically writing women's fiction that are set in today's world, or?
Yes. Exactly.
Cool. What made you decide to shift from historical to contemporary?
Honestly, it was just when the idea struck me for the story, it was a contemporary story, in my head. And I was kind of like, okay, let's, give it a try. And I like both. I read both, very actively. But then once I was writing, the contemporary, I guess there's a difference when it comes to research for sure. Like, we're living in modern times. You don't have to do that like digging of time periods and history and all of that to necessarily like build your world. So there was that element. And I enjoyed this one a lot. So I'm looking forward to the next ones.
Very cool. Do you worry at all about the shift in audience, having built an audience around historical fiction and then bringing them into more contemporary fiction?
I think for me, that's not really a huge factor. I was so brand new. I'm still new, and I think from what I've heard and read from other authors is that it's usually not till like book 3, 4 or something that you kind of like find your groove and find where, you'll sit really well. So I think, this is book 3 that just came out. I'm working on the next. I think I'm, right exactly where I'm supposed to be. Now, obviously more established authors like could run into trouble with that. And I know that's where like pen names come in and things along those lines, but I'm still early enough that I'm still settling in.
Oh, that's cool. Well, I think about someone like Kristen Hanna, though, who made her name with the historical fiction, but most of the rest of her books are contemporary women's fiction. So
I've read several of hers. I mean, she's amazing. And she can kind of blend it a little bit too, but she's like, has such a devoted readership. I think they'll read whatever she puts out.
I agree. So it's always a conversation that comes up, and it's something that I'm curious about too, because originally I wanted to start off with historical fiction. I was working on a World War II historical fiction, and kind of same as you, like the story that was really calling me was actually contemporary. Well, it's set in the late 90s, and some people like to say that's not historical fiction, but I refuse to believe that the 90s is historical fiction.
I know, that's crazy.
But sometimes you just got to go where the story takes you, right?
Yes.
And winds up being a better book, I think, anyway, when you go that route. So originally you must have been looking towards the traditional route, correct?
I was. With this book, I thought I was going to go for the agent, go for the traditional publishing deal. And I did at first. I spent several months querying, like put all my time and effort into really researching agents and finding good fits, making my list, writing the synopsis, the whole deal, which is a whole a whole process.
Yes, indeed.
And, I really jumped in and was excited. And I had a really pretty good response right out the gates, like some requests, some fulls, like all of that kind of stuff. I was super excited. But just then more and more I went along, and it really wasn't even that long. It was almost from the very beginning. I felt like I was doing it because I thought that's what I was supposed to do and not what really I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
There's definitely pros and cons to any publishing path you take. But for me, my gut was always saying like, this just doesn't feel right. And so it was probably after maybe 3 or 4 months when I decided to listen to what my gut was saying, withdrew all my submissions, and made the pivot to go completely indie. It was just a personal decision. It was what fit best for me with this project at that particular time. And I'm not against traditional publishing by any means, and I could see myself potentially doing it down the road. But I think writing and publishing is such an individual process per author, but also individual process per work.
Yeah.
And now authors have so many more avenues at their disposal, and self-publishing is not what it was 20, 30 years ago. So, I'm open to all of it. But for this one, I ended up being very happy with my decision, and I'm glad that I did what I did.
And, kind of something that we have seen with some of, especially some really big names that we're hearing a lot of lately, like Colleen Hoover, other names like that. Like, there's absolutely nothing wrong with starting out in the indie process. Like you alluded to a minute ago, you're finding your voice in those first couple of books anyway. So the likelihood of coming out the gates with a book that is so strong and so like captivating that a traditional publisher is just going to jump out and grab it's not super likely.
Yeah, it's extremely slim. And you're right, to the point about Colleen Hoover. I mean, everyone's buzzing about her. Clearly, she has like 7 books on the New York Times bestseller list, but I don't think a lot of readers know her backstory. I think the publishing world and the authors do, but readers might be surprised, or they might not even care. And that's the thing that I think is interesting, is I don't really think readers care how the book comes to market. They just like a good book.
Right.
And so, yeah, but Colleen Hoover is a great example of success her way. She's written so many different genres. We were just talking about that, like cross genre, and she's almost hard to define. And I've read articles about her saying like, she doesn't really fit the mold, fit the box, but in a good way.
Right. Well, I mean, I think one of the things we talk about a lot, so, well, shoot, where did I even start with this question? Because there's a lot of thoughts running through my head right now, but I think that a lot of us have this idea that our first book needs to be perfect, needs to get out there. We need to hit the New York Times bestseller with our first book, or sell thousands and thousands of copies and all of that stuff. But in reality, like, most of us are not trained writers. We're working on our craft. We're growing. We learn so much. Just the development in my writing that happened from the beginning to the end of writing my first novel was like monumental. But even so, I go into publishing this knowing that it's a first book by a first-time author, right?
Exactly.
And I know that I will grow and continue to write better. And I think that you're really onto something by just focusing on writing the books, writing the stories, getting better at your craft, getting more books into the world, growing that readership. Would you agree?
Totally. Yes, 100%. Like, I am a much different writer than I was a year ago, 3 years ago, when, with my first book, whatever, completely different, but that's like normal. And I don't think that's something to be embarrassed about. I think that's just like, that's life. That's getting better at what you're doing. I mean, in anything, think about sports, think about acting, think about any kind of arts or creativity. You're going to get better the more you do it. So it just sort of makes sense.
Right. Absolutely. So as you're doing this indie route, let's talk about, now you're about to publish your third book. And so what are some of the biggest pros and cons? We can start with either one, of going the indie route for you.
So for me, the pros were, enough to make me want to take that leap and do it, which was mainly the control factor.
Mm-hmm.
So as an indie author, you retain all the control and all the rights to everything with your book. I, was able to, keep the title I wanted, the cover design that I wanted, all the content, put it out when I wanted, all of that. And, if you go the traditional route, that's not necessarily always the case. You're basically selling your book to the publisher. And I'm sure in some instances, it's a great relationship and a great experience, but I've also talked to some writers that it wasn't, and that they didn't like their cover, or, all of that kind of stuff, and they didn't really have much of a say. So for me, it was definitely control. And a big one too was the timeline, because traditional publishing is notoriously slow.
Yeah.
And I'm not necessarily crazy patient person. So I was sort of like, I'm ready for this, and this book is ready in this project. So I wanted to get it out quicker than what the traditional timeline was going to allow. And so those were two of the huge pros. Definitely cons as well. It's a huge learning curve. If you're going to do everything yourself, you're like a one-person show. It's like a crash course in small business ownership, and you're in charge of everything. Now, of course, like, a self-publisher can hire out services, a cover designer, a formatter, marketing, publicists, all of those sorts of things. I didn't. I was able to do a lot of it on my own because I had that skill set, which was great for me, but that's not something I would recommend to someone unless you have those skills. So I really think one of the biggest things about self-published books is to make sure that your cover really stands out. And if you don't have design skills or know anything about Adobe or, those sorts of programs, don't take a stab at it. It's worth it to spend the money to get someone to do it. So
I would even go a step further and say, unless you've been trained in book cover design,
true.
I would stay away from it, because one of the things that I've noticed is that a lot of authors don't do the research that they need to be doing on what is currently in the marketplace and performing well. Like, they have an idea, and I consider myself in this category as well. With my first book, I had an idea for what I wanted, and I actually did hire somebody, but again, I knew nothing about book publishing at the time. So when someone said they could do a cover design, I assumed they knew what they were doing.
Right.
Lo and behold, I learned that not all, even people who can make a book cover, really understand book covers. And there's so many elements to include, like what is really, just the type of font that's chosen, how it's laid out, where the title is versus images. There's so many factors to that. So yeah, I would.
So many. I would like, I'm so fascinated by cover design. I follow some designers, and just, I think it's such an art, and so fascinating to look at them, compare, and the trends. But you're so right. Like, it has to match the genre. It has to match what's out there now. And yeah, that's a big part of it.
So beyond beyond making your cover stand out, which really, really is important, because you get that 0.3 seconds when someone's scrolling through book covers to decide whether or not they want to click on your book. What are some of the other things that you've done to make your indie books stand out from the masses? Because historical fiction, huge. Contemporary fiction, huge. There's millions of books in these things, in these categories.
The cover really, like you said, is number one. And I spent a lot of time doing the research and making sure I was very happy with it. The other thing that I would recommend to indie authors is to try to get some author blurbs on your cover. So that's going to require reaching out to people that are in your genre, whether they're in your community and you know them already, or whether they're kind of people that you aspire to. It doesn't hurt to just send a message. And, as long as it's a very professionally written, request that, I'll send you a copy. Would you be willing to read in blurb, that kind of stuff. But nowadays, you don't see covers without blurbs. I mean, a lot of them don't even have back cover plot summaries. It's just a list of blurbs, which that's a whole nother conversation, whether you like that or not. But it's something that we've kind of gotten used to. And when you see a book cover that doesn't have any of those sort of shout outs or recommendations, it makes you go, what is this? So,
yeah, I do know. Actually, I was researching for one of our authors not too long ago. So I went to some similar books to look on the back cover to see how they did their description on the back page. And I saw that to be very true too, that most of the big name authors, it's just blurbs on the back. Right. There's no description at all of the book.
I mean, obviously hardcovers with a dust jacket,
right.
the cover copy will be on the inside dust jacket. But paperbacks, once those come out, if you're a big enough name, people are going to read it. They almost don't care what it's about. You know what I mean? Right. So yeah, I would definitely encourage, see if you can get one or two blurbs and use that for your marketing, use it for your covers. Make sure you have a really professional headshot, on a solid background, good lighting. That makes a big difference too.
Yeah, I would agree. So what are some of the things that you have done to build your author platform and to market your book out there?
Social media has been great for me. I had a a small following, maybe like 1,000 people or something on Instagram. And then I've really worked to build that up. And I'm sharing, reviews of the book, and I'm sharing, reader responses, those sorts of things. But I've also like had a lot of fun with reels.
Oh
So
yeah.
I know some people are scared of the videos. They're scared of, putting their face out there. And I've just had so much fun with it. There's so many things you can do with books that are trying to market your book, but also market you as an author and tap into that author community, the readers, like funny stuff, things that are just relatable. So that's been really fun for me. And I think that that's kind of gotten my cover out there a little bit and helped.
So one of the biggest questions we get from our audience, and I feel this right now too. I'm launching my first novel. I've done many nonfiction books, and I feel like this is just so different. And I
Yeah.
do feel that the compelling need to be on social media and using Instagram. What I'm struggling with is time balance, and creating some of those things takes a lot of time. Do you have a system? Like, do you have a dedicated time where you spend on social media, or how exactly are you doing this?
Not a dedicated time. I have 3 small children, and so I'm busy with them as well. Obviously, the school year is helpful, but summer, not so much.
Right.
Um, so for me, I try to really not make it like a pressure system where I feel like I have to post something every day, or I have to film something, a reel every day. It's when I think of something or see something that would work, I save it, or I'll do it if I have a couple minutes, but I'm not trying to make this like a must do sort of thing.
Right.
Sometimes if I have like several ideas, I'll batch record. And so I'll, maybe make 3 and then save them, and you can, come back. You've been posted something for a while and you're kind of like, oh, I don't have anything to post. Like, oh, I made that reel like a couple weeks ago, and,
Yeah.
save it in your drafts and it's there. So whenever the creativity strikes is when I do it, but I don't really make it a pressure thing.
And I think that's how you keep it fun, right? When it's
Exactly.
a pressure thing, then it's like, oh my gosh, I haven't posted today and I didn't post yesterday. And
Yes.
now I hate this.
Yes. And there's sometimes when I'm like, my creativity is really high and I've got tons of fun ideas. And then there's other times where I'm like, I have nothing. And and then you think like, I'll never make anything good again or whatever, but it comes back. It's like an up and down.
Absolutely. Have you made much of an effort with advanced readers and building that kind of thing? And if so, what steps have you taken for that?
Yeah, so my ARC readers this summer were great. I reached out to them, and being an indie author, I had a much shorter time frame, like launch period. Traditional publishing, you have a year or more.
Right.
I gave myself like 3 or 4 months, which is much shorter, but it was still manageable. That was my choice, and I had the control over that. And so I reached out to probably, I would say maybe 8 or 10 ARC readers that were in my author community who got an early advanced copy and read, reviewed, sent me blurbs, all of that sort of stuff. So yeah, that was really great. And that's super important for any author, but definitely if you're going to do it yourself and self-publish, like build that into your timeline.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So what other, we've discussed a whole lot of things. Do you have any tips that we haven't covered that you'd really like to share with authors?
I think just like really following your gut is super important in this whole industry, and in this process is, writing what makes you happy and you enjoy, because otherwise you kind of take the joy out of it,
Yeah.
So if you're doing it because it's a passion, great. If you're doing it to make money, that's also great. But you have to kind of find that balance, So for me, I'm always reminding myself of that and being proud of how far I've come and trying not to compare to other people. So that, it's
Right.
tough, but the comparisonitis is definitely a problem.
Comparison is a killer. That's for absolute sure. All right. Well, where do people connect with you, find you, follow you, get your books, all those good things?
So I'm most active on Instagram. You can find me at Jen Craven Author. I'm on Facebook as well, a little bit of TikTok. I'm trying to kind of work my way in there, but Instagram's definitely my sweet spot and where I spend most of my time. My website is www.jencraven.com. You can buy my books there, signed copies, find out what I'm doing, what I'm working on. And I always like to really promote indie bookstores. So if you go to bookshop.org, you can request my books from any of your local favorite bookstores in your town. And support local, shop small,
Yes.
support local. Yeah. Indie authors.
Absolutely. Just a plug on that. So many authors have been having mega challenges with the big A word. So, that site is definitely causing some issues. Definitely support bookshop.org. And one of the best parts about bookshop.org is they're a nonprofit and they give money back to the local bookstores. And goodness knows, since COVID, they have been struggling. So
I think sometimes readers don't realize, like, yes, Amazon is very easy. It's a one click and you get it in 2 days, and that's great. But can you wait like a couple more days and get it, in a different manner? And
yeah.
it's still the same product, just as easy, a
Yep.
click away.
Yep.
So definitely that's my recommendation.
And supports people that need it a whole lot more than the other one. I'm trying not to use the A word right now. No, I'm just kidding.
Exactly.
Amazon serves its purpose and has made a huge difference in the lives of many indie authors, but there are other options too. So, well, thanks, Jen. This has been awesome. I really appreciate your time and your insight. I always love digging into the brains of other authors and seeing what's happening, and I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome.
You don't have to give me your heart. You don't have to give it away. You don't got
Thank you for joining us on the Publisher Podcast. We hope to see you back for the next episode. Great, huge thanks goes to Jasmine Commerce for the use of her song. You can find Jasmine on SoundCloud. Go check out all of her music. We'll see you next time.